And the work that he has done is absolutely outstanding. We have mood music. When you enter into the symposium, you see some maps, what are called the UFO weather maps. And our next speaker, Steve Reichmuth, has actually compiled all the data from the content management system and the CMS system that MUFON has initiated, along with all of the National UFO Reporting Center data collected by Peter Davenport. And he has collected all this data and made these maps for all of us to see the sightings across the nation. You can see large pockets of sightings in large cities. The work that he has done is outstanding. And he does this, I thought it was done by software, where he plugs in dates and times and locations, and it spits out a map. What I just found out was he does this all by hand. All that was done by our next speaker, Steve Reichmuth, all by hand. So please let me welcome to the stage to better explain all the data he has collected, Mr. Steve Reichmuth. Can everybody hear me? Is everybody having fun? Anyway. How's that? Can you hear me? No? They can't hear me yet. I can hear myself a little bit. Wow. Okay, well, it's a great honor and a privilege to be here. And this is my first symposium I've ever been to. And someone thought these maps, I should show them. So they had me come here to Denver, and I'm glad to share them with you. And hopefully they can educate and illuminate and give you maybe a bigger picture of what's the whole thing. Now, this does not necessarily, the maps I'm about to present are only for North and Central America. We have to start at the beginning somewhere. But eventually, maybe worldwide maps might be a possibility in the future. These maps are done by hand on my computer, as my wife will testify, all the time I spent on that. But Tom Carlson and Jan Harzan are working with me on a program so that we can have instantaneous plotting on a map so that you can refer to this, not quite like a radar map, but pretty darn close. And it'll be able to give you see what's going on for state section directors, field investigators. They'll be able to see where things are happening, where they're not happening, where they can move resources and personnel to help them in investigating the greatest mystery of our time. Anyway. These maps are through the kind cooperation of Peter Davenport and MUFON, the Mutual UFO Network, CMS, and then Peter Davenport's site. Whenever he publishes his sightings, sometimes every month, whenever it is, we plot these. And it was just a simple experiment. I just wanted to see, when you look at a database, it can be very dry, almost like looking at a telephone book. And any of you that scan through these cases all the time may realize that. So I wanted to present it in a visual fashion, and I wanted to see how everything panned out geographically. Anyway, I guess I got into MUFON not too long ago, just a few years ago. I've worked in the dental field. Actually, I've been in that for about 30 years. And at a certain time in my life, I kind of wanted to dedicate more of it to this UFO problem. I've been interested in it all my life. I've been a pessimist or a skeptic, and also maybe a believer, back and forth. And then I decided
at a particular time a few years ago to really find out for myself personally about the problem. I wanted to talk to the witnesses, see in their eyes what they were seeing, look at them, talk with them, read their body language, and just get to know them. This is really a very human scientific endeavor we're trying to do. We don't have a lot of scientific instruments. Basically, we have the subjective opinions of our witnesses to go by. These are our instruments. And so as a result, we're going to have some interesting comments, I hope, during this discussion. Go to the next. This was one of the first early maps I did. I started in, I think in June. The colors and everything are kind of, we decided at this point it was just the NORFAC database. But as time went along, we started to get a little more sophisticated. I wanted to add, at this time, the MUFON CMS database was not up yet. At this time, shortly after that, it was. So I immediately incorporated it. Now this, to give you an idea, when we're looking at the maps in a few minutes, this shows you the population density of the United States, at least the 48 states, county by county. These are all the counties. The darker colors show the more populated, heavily populated areas. So it gives you an idea of where people live, where they're spread out, where they're living and where they're not living. California, but a look around Ohio, Michigan, all through the New England, down south to Florida, and then along the coast, predominantly along the coast. So with that in mind, this was the first map I came up with. This was for July. And as you can see, June and July, there was a lot of activity around Vancouver, Washington, Gresham, Oregon. This was the area where Keith Arnold had his famous sighting in 1947. Up in the, this is in this area up here. That's where also a very interesting elk abduction case occurred, where forestry workers picked up, or actually witnessed, an elk literally being lifted out into the air and taken away. And in July, there were actually over 600 raw sightings from both databases. There were 3 entity cases from these databases. There was the Stockton area, California, Williston, North Dakota, and Independence, Missouri. There were 3 entity sightings. The Stockton one I actually investigated myself. There was an entity that appeared, a female hybrid, in a woman's bedroom next to her bed. And then there were 3 landing cases: Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and then St. Catharines, Ontario, up here, and then one down in Loosedale, Mississippi, down there. It's maybe a coincidence, but along here, that longitude is 79 degrees, 15 minutes. It happens to be those two, the Chapel Hill and the St. Catharines, are all on the same longitude. Maybe it's a coincidence, maybe not. But at the same time, there was a buildup of activity around Cleveland, Ohio, right there. And this is something to note for the near future. They were reporting red glowing orbs and objects. And suddenly you were starting to see with these maps accumulations of clusters of objects where they seem to be maybe working together. Southern California is always very busy. Northern California is fairly quiet. Seattle, in that area, and Northern Oregon, always busy. Usually around Houston, Florida, and then the whole East Coast, usually around New Jersey, Eastern Pennsylvania, New York, Hudson Valley. My dot is right there on where Hudson Valley is right now. I have to keep an eye on that, so watch how that develops. There were a lot of, let me see, you can't see it, but down here, there was a fishing expedition, and I think I talked with the state section director for Florida last night. She mentioned that. That's the plot for it. That showed up. And there have been triangle sightings up and down the Central Valley of California. But these are not necessarily large triangles. These are small objects about the size of a car doing some amazing aerobatics along the Highway 5 interstate. Yeah, here's a close-up of July. It's the entity sighting in Stockton. See the activity up north. And then the blue symbols represent MUFON. The red symbols represent NORFAC. These here are triangle sightings. These here are other objects. These red dots are just anomalous lights. That's a disk. So you can see there's a variety. And maybe more triangles than maybe you might imagine. The E represents an entity. There's another disk sighting. Two triangles, each from the same data, different databases, two independent reports, both reporting a triangle. Up here in north, this is in Colorado. Here's the East Coast. Here's the same thing we were talking about. Here's the landings. Chapel Hill, North Carolina. This landing occurred at St. Catharines. There was a bunch of people camping, and some objects came down. One came low to the ground. They scurried into the forest to hide. And that's the report. It's near Niagara Falls. It's also interesting that Chapel Hill and St. Catharines are college towns. Kind of interesting. But it shows the breakdown. It shows the distribution. There's Cleveland, I was telling you about earlier. We're getting a big blob of red. Now, actually, that's probably geographically a much tighter area. But because of the limitations of the map, all around Lake Ontario, that whole area there is very busy. All around the perimeter, including that landing. There's Cleveland, highlighted. It's interesting that there'll be a dispersed pattern, and at the same time, it's a term I call a mini flap, where we usually think of a flap as something over a longer period of time, and with usually a very wide range of activity, discs, flying, triangles, abductions, cattle mutilations, the whole gambit. That's technically not necessarily true in this particular case. So in a mini flap, I refer to that, this is my own term, basically where there's actually an intense amount of activity within a short brief of time in a very tight area. Now, this is August. The total number of UFOs actually dropped by about half. Notable were a number of large triangle sightings, all within a period of 1 week, up around Eugene, Oregon, right up in here, along a valley. And there was one, I think, from MUFON, maybe, and then there were a number of them from Norfolk. I thought that was very interesting. There seemed to be an odd shift, too. Notice suddenly there's a predominance of sightings in Northern California, but actually, and it's usually relatively quiet, at least in comparison to previous months, in Southern California. Now, that's highly unusual. When I first started this, I thought maybe they were flip-flopping back and forth between north and south, but that doesn't seem to be the case. It seems to be predominantly, there's always the dominance of sightings in the south and in the north. This is actually unusual. There was a increased activity around Minneapolis, St. Paul, up here. Hudson Valley, New York, New England, down in Monterrey, Mexico. There was a sighting. There was one in Puerto Rico, a large triangle. Here's August again, close up. This is a disk sighting for MUFON. Shows you how it works. They're kind of scattered here, almost a very diverse, dispersed pattern. Now, as much as these could represent objects, this is also very much a social study, too, because we're dependent on witnesses. This is basically what they're seeing. Some highlighted areas, the triangle areas, where there was that intense activity in August, and then the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area. This is September. This was a very interesting month. We had an interesting thing happen. There was a Minotaur missile launch from Vandenberg Air Force Base down here. And as a result of that, we had an interesting way, a kind of a baseline to compare, because we had a known object. And we wanted to see, we were able to see, not wanted to see, but were able to see how people were reporting what they were seeing of something that we actually knew what it was. And using that as a comparison with things that maybe were less known. But the main thing, the dramatic thing, there's an increase. Cleveland, Ohio has dropped, but now the red objects, the same descriptions, are all beginning to accumulate around Chicago, Illinois, in an area called Tinley Park. This was very interesting. It's kind of diminishing a little bit in Seattle, Florida, but this is here, here, and here. There was the Minotaur missile launch, which was very interesting. Alberta, Canada. It doesn't seem like much is going on up there, but that's such a desolate area. To have that many reports, it's very interesting. There's going to be some entity sightings later on. One of them was for an 8-hour siege at somebody's house or cabin, and it was a pretty frightening night. That was later on up there in that area. Here it is in the east, showing, you can see in your states, many of you state directors, you can see how your things, there was there. I didn't know quite what to pinpoint. Actually, I just started circling everything. Very busy month, September. Kind of contrast. There was only half as many in August. There was about 600 total sightings between both databases in July. It dropped to half of that in August, and then it was back up to almost 600 again in September. These areas, particularly this area of Texas, is always active. There's Alberta. There's a MUFON sighting. You can see numbers. At this time, I started making notes about the dates. And if there were objects all on the same date in the same area, I made a highlight of that. Seattle. Here's northern Oregon, around Vancouver, or Vancouver, Washington, and Oregon. Now, this is the thing that caused a big flap, I guess, but a human flap as far as witness sightings. This is the Minotaur launch. This is the actual launch on September 22nd. And they've done many of these, but what was unusual about this one was it was at dusk. It was at sunset. The sun had just gone down, and so it made for a very spectacular launch. This was a military payload. They were testing a couple of mini satellites. This is actually a converted Minuteman missile used to put small payloads into orbit. And this is in Southern California. This is what people were seeing. This is actually what they were seeing. This is as it's climbing out. This is a time-lapse picture because you can see that's planet there. You can guess what planet that is. It's our old friend Venus, right there. It seems probably appropriate that Venus should be in a UFO lecture. So that gives you an idea of what's going on. Here's another photograph of the staging. Very spectacular. They announce these on the internet, and we take those into account in northern and southern California when they're doing their launches so that we can account for that in our, what people are reporting. Here's another photograph as it's climbing out. Now here's see these IFOs, all 22, all September 22nd. These are all as a result of Northern California, Southern California, of course. Vandenberg is right there at Lompoc, but also in Arizona, also New Mexico. The farthest away sighting was in Colorado, at Rifle, Colorado. There was a report even of this object climbing out. Yeah, down here in New Mexico. So it makes you wonder if something was really wanted to be conspicuous and the conditions were right. But some of the reports coming into the databases, now Peter often gets many hoaxes, and he spends a considerable amount of time filtering through these. This is why there's sometimes a lag time between the time he gets them and he posts them on the internet. And he filters those out. As many as 50% could be hoaxes from teenagers and things who think they're... But what this means is people were reporting in. One reported that it was the War of the Worlds. The Tom Cruise movie had just came out. Several reported triangle sightings, of all things. You know, that object you saw climbing out, did that look like a triangle to you? I don't think so. But that was just some of the things. Other people, and actually about maybe 50% of them, actually reported a bright, brilliant object, which indeed it was. So that gives us an idea of maybe a test of what people are reporting and maybe the level of sincerity or their level of skill and observation, whatever. Nothing is quite exact in this, unfortunately. It's a kind of a feel. But you get a kind of a situational awareness from that. Here's the last picture of it climbing out. These are two military people watching it at Vandenberg. And I guess the next month, this is October. Look at there. It's still building. This is around Tinley Park. And there was over 40 to 50 sightings, all independent sightings of the same thing. I don't know what's going on. But interesting, look how, at the same time, Seattle, it's deserted. Did everybody fly the coop for Chicago? Does this indicate perhaps there's a limited number of spacecraft available to them? I don't know. It's just a lot of guesses. I hate guesses, but maybe theories. But here's a more close-up. The usual activity in northern and southern California, up along the valley. But Seattle is deserted, practically. Interesting, this is a very desolate area, very unpopulated area up around Montana. This is where the Minuteman missile bases are, up around that area. But look at Chicago. Actually, it's a much tighter area. It's a few miles west of Chicago, a place called Tinley Park, in the suburbs around there, all reporting red lights, objects, anomalous objects, just like the ones earlier up here in Cleveland. But now they've all congregated over here. Now, one interesting thing that was going on at that time, and it probably has no relation, is the World Series was going on. And I always joke in my report that maybe that some hybrid overheard a conversation, and they said that the Chicago White Sox, it was an astronomical event that since 1919, since the last time they had showed up, so they thought maybe they better check it out. But the opposing team in Houston, there's a landing, but fairly quiet. So apparently, I think the ETs were Chicago White Sox fans in the relation to. So isn't that interesting? They'll all congregate like that. Now that'll disappear in a few short months. Yeah, West Chicago. Seattle was quiet. It's just interesting to think that possibly could they have even if, let's say, 10 or 20% of these were actual craft, does that indicate possibly they have a limit or a certain limited number of craft to perform their tasks, whatever it is, abductions, reconnaissance, material, collecting cattle mutilations, whatever they're up to. There's 2 landings in Texas. There was a very interesting case here in Houston. An elderly couple and their pet had an object come over their backyard, and it frightened them out of their wits. They were too afraid to go out in the morning. When they came out in the morning, their swimming pool the water level was 6 inches lower. That was on a NORFAC report. That was very interesting. And look at Seattle. It's almost like somebody flew the coop. Here's the same map above compared to the population density. Now, population density is very important in these studies, I feel, because obviously the more people, the more eyes, the more reports that are potentially possible. But it changes from month to month. Many populated areas like Seattle, suddenly you would think there'd be much more, but actually it's very quiet. So people are not just reporting anything. Oh, excuse me a minute. This is November. Very busy in the Bay Area. I'm from Northern California. I'm with that chapter of MUFON, and it's a privilege to be there. And I don't think there's anything more fun than being a field investigator. And this area there, we've been having all kinds of activity and abductions, contacts around Lodi, Stockton, Sacramento. A lot of famous, notable sightings up around Sonora. Perhaps you've seen the website where people have been taking videos. That's up in that area too. Lake Mount Shasta is up here, where it's always been known for a very, very spiritual place. Oddly quiet. We've all often discussed why that is, and I think they're seeing things, they're just simply not reporting them. But back east, Michigan is getting very busy. Illinois, it's starting to cool off a bit. But Michigan, they're all moving around over there, along Ontario, up around Toronto, New Jersey, New York, particularly lower New York, Massachusetts, Florida. Now, what was very interesting, and one of the things these maps can point out, is suddenly you'll see coincidences. Particularly notable is right here, Eglin Air Force Base. There were some 20 to 25 sightings, all independent, all on the same night, November 7th. What's going on? Some sort of activity, and reports were coming in of all descriptions: discs, lights, triangles, no entity reports. Also, Gulf Breeze is around this area. I know that's a name you're quite familiar with. Yes. Illinois, Michigan, very active. I guess I should say New England too. I don't mean to leave them out. It's almost like this is just a normal average month for them. It's quite busy, particularly around New York, around this area. Here's Hudson Valley, Massachusetts, Connecticut, but also along the Ohio River, Mississippi. This is around, there was an interesting train collision in 2003 that's only been reported in the last few months between a coal train and a UFO, and that was in this area here. This particular area seems to be active too, all along the Appalachian Range, up here around northern Georgia. Here we are again, Eglin Air Force Base, Pensacola, Gulf Breeze, all around there. Within a period of 2-3 hours, a significant number of sightings, all on the same date. I've never had that so far in the time I've been plotting, where there's been so many all on one day. Maybe a date to remember. This was an interesting month, December. We actually, in the database, I'm constantly adding new symbols. We had to come up with airborne sightings. We had one here off of California on a route, aircraft flying from Phoenix to Hawaii. We have the symbols there. And there's a similar report, which I have photographs for here, over Utah. This was heading to New York from San Francisco. Here they are in close-up. We had these two to make new symbols. These are always very interesting. These were not pilot reports. These were only passengers. This is what the passenger over Utah photographed. It seems to be a vague disk. It's almost like it's using some sort of visible stealth. But because maybe of an oblique angle, I'm theorizing, the edge, like the edge of a saucer, it's hard to mask what's behind it because of the oblique angle. So you've got this little gray streak. But what's interesting, though, is as the sequence of photographs move on, it's moving along this flight path, the yaw and the pitch seem to be totally irrelevant to any aerodynamic considerations. See, there it is again, pitching up or down, whatever. Here's a more close-up of it. You can begin to see like there's some edge of something there, and they can't quite hide it. At least that's my idea, anyway. There it is again. This is what the passenger took with his digital photo camera out of the passenger window. We were just flying up here a few days ago from California, and the scenery in the background looks all very familiar. And for fun, I tried a new logo. A little artistic license, forgive me. But some exciting things have been going on in Mexico. And UNESCO, is that correct? UNESCO came up with a symbol. And I thought for maybe a unification of effort, I modified the MUFON symbol similar to theirs. So we have for the north and the south, for us gringos up north. Let's see, which month is this? I'm getting into it and I can't even remember. This is January. Yeah, I'm starting to, this was a fairly quiet month. And I could understand why, possibly. It's, a lot of the eyes, our sensors, are basically, it's cold outside. Interesting is, look along here. Many of the reports have moved to the south. And this may be because the weather down here is better for observations. Up north, of course, it would be cold and rain. So, to me, it implies there's a bit of social activity going on, too. It reflects that. That's what's fun about these maps, seeing, you know, it was just a simple experiment. I wanted to see how things moved around. Now, there was an entity sighting. This is the one I mentioned earlier. This was in January, so I imagine there might have been snow. There was an 8-hour siege. Apparently, they saw a gray entity in their driveway. A couple had apparently a frightening experience. There's a similar one down in Montana. There's a question mark next to it because I'm not sure of its credibility yet. So I just put that out for people to check. Yeah, it was Bragg Creek, Alberta, on January 20th. But it gives you an idea of what's going on and where everything's occurring. This is February. Excuse me. Let me go back. I think there was one in Bermuda, too. I think if I can't see it, but I think there was a sighting. Maybe not, I can't tell. Let me move ahead. This is how things are beginning to pan out for 2006. But it shows you things are beginning to, the distribution. There were 2 more airborne sightings. This one actually was a very good report by the first officer of an airplane at 34,000 feet, aircraft flying from New York, a half hour out from heading for Kansas. We can put all this on the map. There was another one. This was a passenger the next day. This was on the 22nd. This was on the 23rd. This passenger here was a witness. It was heading south. There were no photographs taken. Activity continues up around Michigan. You can see the different triangles. Here, here, here. Disc here. These represent other, for lack of a better description, something that couldn't really, or possibly a changing object. Disc sighting here. Here's an anomalous light. Another anomalous light. There's a triangle. A lot. Everybody says, the media tells you there's no UFO sightings. Here's March. This is the latest one I have so far. I'm working on April now. Let's see if I have my notes. Do you think you could come to the mic? I'm sorry. Oh, yes. Yes, he has. Yes, it was on his highlights on his front page. The gentleman's referring to the coal train incident that occurred in Kentucky. A UFO lost power. The train lost power. It was a long coal train. The inertia kept rolling for about another mile or two. Went around a bend, and the upper cab collided with something hovering over the track. And then it, basically, there's photographs of that part at least, of the damage to the front of the train. Whatever it was, the object moved up over the top, and the rest of the locomotive in front was untouched. But the second and third car was totally crushed by something of quite massive. And they rolled to a stop. They were able to get power back, and the dispatcher told them to move to Paintsville, Kentucky. And they did that. When they showed up, this was about 1 in the morning. When they showed up about 3 in the morning, there were, for lack of a better description, government people there waiting. In a short period of time, they took the 2 damaged cars and took them away and put them under covers off on the side tracks. And then they were interrogated, given drug tests, told not to talk about it, of course, for interests of national security. And the conductor refused to talk with them. They confiscated his cell phone because he first wanted to talk to his bosses first, very understandably. And in that case, eventually they were told to move on, minus the 2 cars that were damaged. They could still roll. And they went on to their destination about 10 or 15 miles ahead. There they were met by the company bosses, and they talked with them further. They had an 8-hour rest, and on the trip back on the same route, everything was cleaned up, of course. It was all gone. They were told to keep secret about it. This occurred in 2003, but they're starting to talk about it now. And a report at NORFAC showed up about 1 or 2 months ago, and it's been highlighted on his webpage. So a little plug for Peter's great site. And we have a photograph of the locomotive. The edge of the top ridge of the window has been crumpled in, and the front window has been shattered and blown out. And there's no photographs of the locomotive. So that's what's referring to that, a very interesting case. One of the things I do for this, our Northern California group, is I read all the reports from both CMS and NORFAC, and then I give a little heads up to my bosses and stuff. Ruben sometimes calls me his intel officer and stuff, so kind of an honor. I don't know. I'll try to do my best. I don't know how good I am, but if we can get them. Anyway. This month also, I had to create another new symbol, our first cattle mutilation. This was in Chiraco, New Mexico, actually right among the telescope, the radio telescope array, right in among them. Several MUFON investigators discovered it and made a report. That's why it's in blue. Occurred on the 22nd. Classic cattle mutilation. Ironically, how SETI is looking for evidence. They're looking up, and they maybe should have looked down on the ground. We had an interesting thing happen, and actually we had 2 individuals who were actually creating hoaxes of flying saucers or discs around this area, around Orange County and up around Whittier, California. Remember, that's where Richard Nixon was born. I don't know. They seem to like to pull things. Anyway, around this area. Now, what I included, and I've started to include it since these great articles in the MUFON Journal, are the Minuteman missile silo areas. This is Vandenberg. There's technically not really missiles there, but they do their training there. They do their test launches to maintain their proficiencies. This is the one up there where a lot of that was occurring. But I have a lot of IFOs, or hoaxes, marked in there. And we were able to, through communication with the groups down south, to get some information, and Ruben was able to pass it on to me. And here are the 2 buggers. One of them is actually a cardiologist. I think he'd have better things to do with his time. Anyway, they're selling these little model airplanes. They have lights on them. They change from white to red. So I went and sifted through all the reports and was able to identify most of these. Most of them have the same MO or modus operandi, and they're doing these things, usually around the John Wayne Airport. And it does indicate one thing, though. People are actually making accurate reports. I think people are, in this particular situation, are giving us accurate reports. They were describing literally what they saw, a ringed object with lights around it, dancing around for about 35 minutes. So they were actually very sincere reports. Of course, the source of the report are these characters, not so much. Excuse me, I call them Beavis and Butthead. Excuse me. Here they are here. So there was some activity there. Those are the hoaxes. So we're able to plot quite a bit, even hoaxes. And I think that's important, too. Anyway, up there. And then that was the other significant thing, is the poor cattle mutilation. Now, I'm near at the end of my talk. I'm working on a Northern California map. Now, this could be adapted to other states, too. I can give you things. These are just basically pretty pictures I'm drawing up. But I have all the counties. Northern California we've got a lot of area to cover. This is 47 counties. And we don't have that many investigators. But I can tell you, I don't know why we don't have more, because it is so much fun. And we're doing something so valuable and so important. And the ability to use your imagination, your creativity and investigations powers, and just meeting the people, that's what I value most. A lot of these people, they're just so relieved to have people who will listen to them and talk with them, and you can objectively record what they're saying. One of the things I did was create a patch to reward our field investigators. Now, it can be made into a generic one. We can take that off, and you can put your own state on. But I created this as a kind of a reward and a kind of a way to unify the group. I think and obviously it's a triangle shape, a couple of UFOs under a magnifying glass. This is the Betty Hill star map. I joke with our co-investigators that if you get lost and you're wearing this on your jacket, that's home. That blue star up there. So the question when Betty was asked, well, where are you from? Later it was determined that's our sun right there. These are all the primary stars. Now what are the odds of Betty, out of 1,000 stars in that parsec, coming out with the only stars that are primary main sequence stars? How could she know that? I don't think so. I think it was because somebody showed it to her, someone who had more knowledge about that. Obviously, a lot of these stars weren't even known at the time. This is the Drake equation, which gives us a probability of life in the universe. And there you go, just something to fire up the troops. This is my website. It's kind of a shameless plug. But if you need to refer to these maps, they are archived here. You can see them on the MUFON homepage, and it's an honor to have that there. They must think they must amount to something. So, but I only go back 3 months, but you can go back through the whole catalog at this website. And this is a website I have called UFOresearcher.com. A lot of experiencers there too. They come for support, sharing, and trying to understand this greatest mystery. That's it. Any questions? Only recently, last May 2005. I plan to do it, well, as long as I can. But fortunately, I'm getting some help. I just sort of thought it up and did it. But the programmers are catching up with me, and they're going to get it computerized. And if anything, at least me and my wife can spend some more time together. Any other questions?
Yes, about the sharp drop-off in sightings in the Seattle and Portland area in October 2005, and it seemed to continue to be at a lower level through November, December. That's when the rains hit heavily in the Northwest this last year. I would suggest that it might be a really good statistical analysis to look at weather conditions against UFO reports. You mentioned it, also talking about winter weather. In this particular case, in the Northwest, we get like lots of rain, overcast skies, and just not very good viewing conditions. Of course, it wouldn't affect such things as abductions, but it would affect regular sightings of aerial objects.
Yeah. Thank you. I'll try to do that in time.
Yes.
Hi. Being originally from the south side of Chicago and a White Sox fan, I wanted...
Oh, were you there?
No, unfortunately, but I was interested in all the sightings that were going on in the suburbs around there. And one thing I noticed was the close proximity of both Argonne National Laboratories and the Fermilab National Accelerator, where supposedly they're making antimatters just to the northwest of Tinley Park and Orland Park, and where many of these sightings took place. So it would be interesting to correlate if there was any experiments going on at the time. But
yeah, that's very interesting. I only started putting strategic, how do I say, missile alert. I put the strategic submarine bases up in Puget Sound in Kings Bay, Georgia. There's two, they don't call it Strategic Air Command anymore. It's the classic name, but they do have two bases where there is a nuclear alert for aircraft, a B-2 and B-52s. That's in Louisiana and Arkansas. I included them, and then, of course, the Minuteman fields. Now, the Minuteman fields have been cut in half. There used to be in the 60s and 70s, before the SALT Treaty, about 1,054 of these. Now they're down to 500 because of the SALT II Treaty. But I've included those areas. Those areas have remained the same. Just the numbers within those areas are diminished. So I thought maybe with that article it would be good to include that. And I can maybe include other things in time, as long as it doesn't start to get too cluttered, where people can't read it, and then Any other questions?
Yes, sir. First of all, thank you for your time and research. It benefits myself, among others. Obviously, question is, well, actually, on the History Channel recently, they've had a couple of documentaries on USOs, one about 3 or 4 months ago, and then a most recent one where some retired petty officers have come out of the woodwork to discuss their own sites. And the narrator of the actual documentary actually said it's on the uprise. A known hotspot somewhere in Southern California in some bay where submersible objects are seen going into the water and actually coming out and going right into the sky. Are you aware of any other known hotspots? And if so, can we see in the foreseeable future an extra symbol in your legend on the map to reflect USOs?
Well, USOs are fascinating because I'm fascinated in submarines too, the Cold War, that period of time. But I didn't include it in the maps, but I did have 2 USO reports off of Hawaii, I think in the March 2006 map. But the 2 areas that seem to predominate the most are around Puerto Rico and around the Channel Islands, around Catalina and that area. I know that nuclear submarines do their Tomahawk missile certification tests. The crews actually practice. They have to be certified to be able to know what they're doing. They go to that area to fire their missiles. But there's a lot of other activity at bombing ranges there too. So it's interesting to wonder if maybe these are extraterrestrial craft observing it. Some of them may actually be man-made phenomenon that we're not familiar with. Also in relation to USOs, there's been a remarkable revolution in drones, unmanned aircraft. Some of these can actually be launched from underwater and broach the surface, fly around. They can be controlled remotely by the submarine with a satellite link, and then they can actually return to the submarine, submerge, and then they have an ROV that'll recover it. This is brand new, and it's amazing some of the things that are going on that investigators probably need to be up to date with. Many of them probably are. I'm among a marvelous group of people here, and I'm sure they know more about it than I do.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. One thing I forgot to include, and I think it's important, is I think the work of Larry Hatch. He's another gentleman in the Bay Area who's come up with the UFO, his versions of UFO maps. And he was my inspiration. And I think due credit should be given to him also. I don't think he's here, but his maps show internationally all over the world. But in his case, what motivated me to do mine was he had a total smattering of just whiteout of dots. And you couldn't really determine or see any movement month to month. So I'll try to get something more timely. So I just wanted to bring that up too before my time is up. I have 9 minutes remaining. Yes.
Okay. First of all, what a good thing you've done here to provide this. It's really great.
Thank you.
It's really a new way to look at things, to have this visual overview of where the sighting reports are coming from. I really like it. And so kind of a two-part question. Have you considered including Alaska and Hawaii?
Alaska and Hawaii are in there, at least the bottom end of Alaska. Hawaii is included. It's in the corner, the far left corner of the map.
I just didn't pick those up.
In time, you know, I want to walk before we run.
Yeah.
And it takes a long time. I'm plotting these by hand. I don't have a program, but Tom Carlson and Jan Harzan are Tom is working on it as we speak, actually, probably in Southern California. And the exciting thing about this, it won't be monthly, and it won't be when my health is up to kind of get this. Usually it takes about a week or so to get one of these out, and it has to be checked. Often there's, for example, on the NUFORC web sources, there's no zip codes. So if you get 3 towns with the same name in Pennsylvania, there could be a bit of a problem. So you have to read every report, and if they make a reference to a highway or something, then we've got something we can pinpoint. And when I do that, I use MapQuest, and I plot everyone by hand and do that. But now we're working on a program where it'll basically be real time. When it shows up on MUFON CMS, it'll show up on a map instantaneously.
Oh.
It's almost not quite radar, but at least the best we can do. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean these are UFOs. These are just people reporting something. But that's where you go and check it out.
That's really great. It's all fantastic.
We're trying to do something to help all you guys.
And secondly, I appreciate that your plate is very full right now, but I'm wondering if in the future, how you'd feel about, or if you'd consider reaching out, contacting, say, Brian Vike, our neighbor to the north, who receives a lot of UFO reports from Canada, to kind of get more of a broader view of our continent.
I'm very aware of
what you think about that in the future.
Reports from Canada. I'm basically using these 2 sources for the database, NUFORC and MUFON. And I've been very conscious that there's a considerable amount of activity going in Canada and in Mexico.
Right.
And in time, we've talked about that, and we'd like to incorporate those in the future to give a more comprehensive picture.
Okay. Well, thank you, and more power to you.
Well, thank you. Yes.
Yes, sir. Just a couple short questions. Number one, have you seen any correlation between natural disasters, for example, Katrina, and sightings?
Yes. Yes, I did. I thank you for bringing that up. I can't go back to the map necessarily, but during the aftermath of Katrina, around Mississippi and Louisiana, there was a sudden drop-off. It was sort of wiped out. There were no reports at all. But it's interesting, reports were still coming in the northern parts of those states, even despite all the tragedy and the damage there. That was one example I noticed.
That may have been just communication or something, communication problems or something.
Perhaps.
Interesting. And also, is there a way of correlating where the Goodyear blimp is in relationship to World Series? Was it out at that time? Because I know that sometimes people think that that's kind of an odd thing. It's not too often seen.
Well, I can tell you from personal experience a case I did about the blimps, but that is something maybe we can find out and track. That's a good idea. That's going to be constantly moving, but doesn't sound impossible. We'll just have to find a source That might have to be, my main role, I feel, is just an alert. A lot of these could be hoaxes, too. We don't know what they are. I'm basically illuminating these areas for them, for the local investigators to check out. This is something maybe you should look into, or something to ignore. And if there's something I already know, I find out it's a hoax, I'll include that. And sometimes with a question mark, implying that I'm not really sure, but just check it out.
Thank you.
That's a good idea. I know there was a case in Dublin, California I investigated. It was a remarkable case of a woman that saw an object over hovering low over a car dealership. And she sat and watched it for 4 or 5 minutes, which is a long time. And when she tried to take a picture of it with her cell phone, it flew away. But it was right at the major intersection of 2 freeways, within maybe 100 feet. And how she was the only one that saw it. And of course, you know, if any of you have been to a car dealership, they're ready to pounce on you as soon as you come on. So they must have had eyes. If they were, of course, maybe they were looking out instead of directly above them. But this thing was only maybe 150 feet over their heads, according to the witness. And it flew away. We had a police forensic drawing done of it. And it's interesting that in the Stockton abduction case I mentioned, or not, actually it was not an abduction, we don't know that, excuse me, but it was an entity sighting. The witnesses, remarkably, we showed them at the end of the interview, Ruben did, the police drawing, and their jaws dropped. That was the exact same object that they had seen months later. But one of the things everybody was saying was that this was a Saturn blimp. And we did be able to check with radar reports and logs, and when I got to talk to the pilots, they were very friendly and very welcome to our questions. They said they get UFO reports all the time, wherever they go. Usually they're going to a certain area to cover a football game or something. And we did a check, and at 6:45, the blimp transponder showed it was farther away. It was about 8 to 10 miles away from where the witness was. So whatever she saw, one thing in her favor was we know it wasn't a blimp, even though that we know for sure the blimp was flying that night.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I have 1 minute left. I'll try to be quicker. I'm sorry.
I have a question, and then after your answer, I'll give a comment. But the question is about radar. You brought it up a moment ago. Do you receive radar reports of blips or recorded sightings on radar? And do you plan to plot those on your map?
I don't think so. Right now, I'm just taking them right from the 2 databases. And these are the same databases you can get on the internet. There's nothing exotic about it. That would be grand if we can do that. But I think my wife would probably object.
A comment.
Time. There would be something that would need to be a collaborative thing. But you never know. I'm here to serve everybody and to try to provide maybe with some useful tool. And I'm here to perhaps something that we can be worked out in the future. This could be only the beginning of something.
My comment real quick is I had a sighting in western Colorado, and after a very frustrating search of radar evidence, I was told that the airspace was monitored by Denver and only 10,000 feet or higher, and I was wondering if that is the case, and I can't imagine why they don't monitor below 10,000 feet.
I don't know that.
Thank you.
Yes, real quickly.
It's just a yes or no. I wondered if, with respect to, excuse me, population density, you made any distinction between whether the reports were from locals or people traveling, particularly in the summer.
Most of them seem to be local. Occasionally, I noticed on CMS particularly, reports will be by people who are also traveling. They maybe have a residence in New York, but their sighting was in Pennsylvania. In that case, I always plot the object where it occurred and the time of the event, not the time of the report. So if they were originally from, let's say, Alaska and they're in Pennsylvania, I'll plot it in Pennsylvania, wherever the object was. Does that answer help your question at all?
Yeah, I just wondered with people traveling, particularly in the summer, if that wouldn't change the population density of the area somewhat, and therefore maybe affect the correlation between number of UFO reports versus population density.
I don't know yet. I do know there's a distinct parallel between population density in these areas, but also you'll have occasions where you have a population density but no reports. For example, is Seattle that one month, where it's a very populated area, and consistently month to month there are a lot of sightings. But that one particular month where everybody had, or apparently there was a tremendous amount of sightings around Chicago, that was an example of a population area where it was remarkably quiet that particular month. I think it definitely has an impact on it, and that needs to be taken into account.
Yeah, that's what prompted my question, actually, was that.
Okay. Is that, I think I answered your question. I'm not sure.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, thank you very much. Thank you. Just